Okay, so for today's lesson, we're going to be looking at the process of secularisation and development and extended belief systems and ideologies within Australia. So, what we're going to focus on is, what is secularisation? What does it mean for Australia? And how has that impacted on religion, belief systems, and ideologies in Australia, and also a little bit around the world? So the process of secularisation is the process of a society moving away from structuring it based on a religious values and beliefs to non-religious values and institutions. So essentially the movement away from allowing any one belief system to structure or organise a society based on those beliefs and values. And what this means in more kind of concrete detail is that government, schools, and businesses rely more on social and cultural values to decide how their institutions should function over religious ones. So, like schools, public schools, they function on discussion around what we think they should focus on rather than teaching or preaching to any Christian religion. And that's kind of included in that process of secularization. So, as we might remember, secularization is connected to the process of modernization, as post industrial modern societies are expected to be more secular through the education of persons, as well as a greater focus on the individual and businesses rather than collective community. Also, through education, there's more understanding of the world and how it works, and so people tend to move away from religious explanations of that. So religious affiliation in Australia appears to be decreasing as more young people identify as spiritual more than previously. However, we're going to go into a little bit more detail as that, and that's why I say it appears to be decreasing, but that's not necessarily the case. So therefore, this people secularization sees the decline in more traditional religious affiliation in Australia. As the declining prominence of religion, and this is kind of seen as the declining prominence of religion in society because less people identify as Christian than they have in the past. However, this is not necessarily the case, as whilst it might be indicative of new and different forms of religious flourishing. So the decline in Christianity in Australia does not equal a decline in religious affiliation. It's kind of identifying a greater diversification in religious belief systems, and we're going to go into more detail with this as well. So, secularisation in Australia is increasing in non-religious persons. Australia seems to have gone through secularisation. So, as this graph shows here, people who identified as being non-religious was pretty non-existent, especially during the Great Depression, as people turned to religion to try to alleviate their struggles. And then it's been on a steep incline since the 1970s. So it would appear that Australia is less religious. However, and this is because traditional religion has lost its appeal, and you can definitely see this as well through the way that many Catholic, Protestant, and even some Islamic mosques or churches are trying to appeal to younger groups, and so they're changing the way they kind of structure the belief system and what they focus on as well, especially within youth groups. And because the traditional religions have lost their appeal, those that haven't tried to modify the way they practice have seen closing of churches. And this has been for both in Australia and around the world, especially in Europe. Many churches have closed because of a lack of affiliation. And so this is kind of hinted again to that process of secularization, that people are moving away a little bit from traditional religions as they turn to a more diversified options of religion or greater non-religious belief systems, so things like atheism and agnosticism. So Australia in the 18th century, the reason why it was, I guess, less secular is although there's always been a diversity of religious belief systems in Australia, that's because there was a range of different belief systems and belief systems in the Indigenous population. Great variation. Most Indigenous groups followed a different set of belief systems. So there was a great variation in that. Also, because of migrants that were coming to Australia and the trade routes that Indigenous people had with people outside of Australia, there was a clear existence of Judaism, Christianity, Protestantism, Muslim or Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, and Confucianism. So there was a massive range of belief systems within Australia leading up to the 20th century. However, White Australia policy kind of saw the diminishing or the letting go of this variation in belief system as it stopped. It proclaimed that no one could have a variation because you had to follow Christianity, you had to be white. And so it kind of got rid of a lot of people that followed all of these different belief systems. And so there was a clear decrease in variation of faith. And this is in the 1947 census, as only 0.5% of the population followed or adhered to non-Christian belief systems. So pretty much the entire population identified as Christian at this time. However, the abolition of the White Australia policy allowed again, so went back to that greater diversity in faith. And this has seen Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam be one of the fastest growing religions in Australia, with 6% religious affiliation in 2011 for these belief systems. So going from like 0.5%, so virtually nothing of individuals who identified as being non-Christian, to having 6% religious affiliation in 2011. That is a slow but a recognisable increase. And so this kind of secularisation has seen a change in the way Australia and other nations define themselves. So in the past, whole societies were known as Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, and so on. So they identified themselves with the religions that they affiliated with. However, over the past 50 years, more societies have defined themselves as secular or even multicultural or sometimes multi-faith. So secularisation can be clearly linked to multiculturalism, as, like I've said in the past, the secularisation allows for greater diversification in religious belief systems, and also it allows for the people that follow them to come and practice those religions. So greater diversity in the culture that is expressed within a country as well. So what this means is that Australia is held together today by core values, and these values are focused not on the religion that, it's not focused on Christianity so much, but more on what questions and people think Australia is and what it means. And so these core values are fair go, tolerance, non-discrimination and respect, and they also quite clearly align with our identity as being multicultural and multi-faith as well. There's no one reason for this. There's no one reason why Australia has become secular. I mean, modernisation is part of it, but the reasons why modernisation leads to secularisation, there's no one clear reason. One reason can be seen as the increase in scientific reason, which is leading to the questioning of God. Also the growth in prosperity, because people have more wealth, they don't need to rely on religion as much to support them through their struggles. You know, people in the past would turn to God and pray to try and improve their situation, whereas now in a modern industrial society they don't need to do that as much, and so that can be seen as another reason why people turn away from at least traditional religions to a greater extent than they did in the past. And so, as I've been saying, contemporary Australia has seen a noticeable decline in Christianity. As previously said, a significant proportion of the population followed Christianity, so 99% in 1901, and it's only roughly 60% in 2011. So Christianity is still the dominant religion in Australia, but it's not as followed as it was in the past. In saying that, though, as I said previously, this does not equate to a complete decline in religious affiliation or spirituality, as through the decline in Christianity, we've seen a growth in non-Christian religions, so as previously stated, 6% in 2011 of Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, and also there has been a 60% growth of persons who identify as following non-traditional belief systems. So examples of this are Taoism, Shinto, Sikhism, and Baha'i. Very non-traditional belief systems, not non-traditional as for themselves, but non-traditional for Australia, a Christian nation, to be following. So there is clearly a greater diversification in religious affiliation in Australia due to secularisation. And this is mostly because there has been less restrictions placed on style and choice of worship. So because we are non-secular, we don't control or determine how people can follow, how people follow a religion or which religion they can follow. And so this has led to a greater diversity in religious practice and belief systems. Hare Krishna is a really good example of this. And Hare Krishna are the guys in orange and red at the bottom here. It's based off a Indian spiritual belief system. You might have seen them in pop culture or seen them walking around in Sydney. They do kind of tend to walk around and sing and play that drum, and they have become massive in the West for reasons I'm not familiar with, but that's kind of again linked to secularization. They grew significantly in the 1970s and 1980s, and this is again because of that secularization and because of that process of secularization, people can move away from traditional religions and potentially even choose to be non-religious or choose to follow religions that were not really available to them in the past. And therefore, again, as I've said, spirituality in Australia hasn't changed, it's diversified. So there's more people, there's still the same amount of people or thereabouts who are spiritual or affiliate with some belief system as they did in the past. It's just there's greater diversification. And this is because people who feel like they didn't quite connect with Christianity in the past would have either been Christian and maintained that Christianity, or they would have just chosen to be non-religious as they didn't have any other options. It was either Christian or non-Christian. Whereas now they can explore their identities and their religious identities and continue to explore it until they feel like they align with something. So I'll just quickly go an overview again. The process of secularization is linked to modernization. The reasons for it aren't necessarily hard and fast. It can be because of an increase in scientific reasoning, but it can also be linked to greater wealth and disparity of wealth, which is allowing people to turn away from God. And allowing people to turn away from God to support them in their struggles. And this has seen an increase in diversification of belief systems within within Australia, and not necessarily equals a decline in religious affiliation overall or a decline in spirituality.